Do you self-sabotage whenever you're getting close to a goal? Or maybe you notice that you just can never seem to keep your word to yourself, saying you'll do one thing and the next minute doing the opposite. Well, welcome to the club, sister. If you're like most women, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling of almost being at your goal weight, yet slipping back into unhealthy patterns and putting on even more weight than you started with. Or that feeling of being 3 weeks into a 4 week sugar detox when all of a sudden finding yourself giving up and getting back into the cookies. So, what's really going on here? Why do we self sabotage in these ways, even though we know we want to be healthy? We want to heal our relationship with sugar. And more importantly, how can we actually get out of this toxic cycle so we can actually see lasting changes and lasting results in any area of our life that we're working towards? Well, that is exactly the conversation we are having with today's guest. Tanja Shaw is here to dive into this very topic of self-sabotage. And I know you are absolutely going to be blown away by this conversation that we have. So without further ado, let's roll that interview right now. Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. We are so lucky to be joined by the incredible Tanja Shaw today. Welcome, Tanja. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thanks for that. No, I'm doing really well, and I'm so glad that we have our time together today.
Yeah, yes, this is so wonderful. I just came on your podcast and now you're coming on mine. We're having some really, really fantastic conversations. And I know that everyone listening is going to absolutely love this area and topic that we're diving into today. So before we get into that, I do want to introduce Tanja to all of you who don't know who she is. Tanja is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, kinesiologist, and mindset coach. She is also the founder of Fit and Vibrant coaching programs, owner of Ascend Fitness and Lifestyle, a holistic health coaching studio in Chilliwack, BC. She's also the host of the Fit and Vibrant You podcast, which I had the honor of going on just a few weeks ago. Through functional lab testing, personalized wellness protocols, and mindset coaching, Tanja helps her clients live fitter, healthier, and more vibrant lives in midlife and beyond. Tanja, her husband Keith, and their son Jacob live in Chilliwack, BC, which is about an hour out of Vancouver, those who aren't in our neck of the woods. And she loves being outdoors, being active, doing things like running, hiking, paddleboarding, cycling, and camping. She also loves a slow morning with a good cup of coffee and her cats. Boy, do we have a lot in common, Tanja. I need to come to Chilliwack. We're going camping, and we're going hiking, and we're going to bring our cats and a cup of coffee.
Yep. I actually have a backpack for my cats, but I have not actually gotten them into it yet. So we'll see.
Yes. I did think about it, but then I thought, when I go hiking, I just want to be like relaxed. I don't want to be in like worry mom mode about, are they stressed? Or
you're carrying enough stuff on your back anyway, like the chunky ones.
Yes, I know. Yeah. So, okay, let's dive in a little deeper. For those, I know I shared a little bit about you, but would love to kind of start off with hearing a little bit of your backstory. What got you into obviously doing the amazing healing work that you're doing now with your clients? What's your story?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think like most of us who help others, we find our thing by going through it ourselves and having our own awakenings. And I started as growing up as a teenager, I always loved fitness. I loved the sports. I did lots of individual sports. I loved how it made me feel. I felt more inspired and creative. And then I also discovered that there was a science side of things, and I liked science as well. So I did my degree in kinesiology. And I worked as a kinesiologist at a physiotherapy clinic in Parksville, actually, for the first 2 years of my career. And I started doing some personal training there and just really fell in love with it. I fell in love with the personal relationship side of things. I loved how I could help someone not just sort of become unwell, but also like just really, the word like optimize your health is kind of like, cliche in general, but really become the human beings that they wanted to be through just taking care of their body. And it was around there that I also did my first diet. And this is like quite old for a lot of people. A lot of my clients do their first diet when they're 8 or 10 or even earlier than that. And I did this 9-day kind of cleanse sort of thing that was, shakes and little like tablets, and, you eat like maybe one meal a day at the most. And I lost a fair bit of weight in those 9 days, and I felt really good. And I felt, more energized. Little did I know that I was running on cortisol the entire time because I wasn't eating anything. And for a lot of people, when they do their diets, they go through the cycle of this on again, off again, weight gain, weight loss. And for me, it turned into an obsession of just really always trying to perfect my body, get into a smaller size. I put so much emphasis on that, the multiple times a day weighing myself, and not to say that the scale is a bad thing or anything like that, but it was my relationship to it that was not great. When I was with my husband, we went to England and France for 2 weeks. And I was just so worried that I was going to just gain weight. And I'm like, that's not what you want to remember from your trip to France. You want to just enjoy it, right? And so I was caught in this diet prison. At the same time, I started my own personal training business when I moved to Chilliwack. And I was trying to help people become, fit and well by doing the high intensity interval training and the strength workouts. And it was very encouraging and very nice, and, low carb diets and all these kind of things. But a lot of people, when you work on a personal training basis, you get to know your clients quite well. And I realized that there was so many of them just struggled with something else. It was like, I know what to do, but why am I not doing it? Or why can I like stick with it for a while, but I can't really stick with it for long term? We have this like weight gain, weight loss, this yo-yo cycle where you do well, when you have the personal training appointments, but then how do we sustain that? And I realized that there was really something missing from the diet and fitness and the wellness industry. There's this gap, and I wanted to fill it with, and I thought that, I had this revelation. I'm like, sometimes some people do the things, they become fitter, they start working out, they start eating better, and they actually fundamentally change as a person. Their mindset changes. They actually change their lifestyle. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people revert back to their old patterns. And so I thought, what if we were actually more intentional, and we didn't just hope that we would, change as a result of doing the fitness side of things or the diet side of things? What about if we actually did the work to actually change what was happening inside of us along doing everything else? And now, like, I feel like we all talk about mindset, but I still think there's lots of gaps in the mindset coaching. We have things like just affirmations or just stick with it. And you got to just get in the right mindset, but then we don't really know how to do it or what that looks like. And I continue to do a lot of work with my clients on the mindset side of things. And especially because I was struggling with my own relationship with food, and I knew something had to change. I had to reject that diet mentality and, start to come home to myself and start to, do things out of a place of loving myself, not just always wanting to, bully myself into a better body. And so, it was 2015 that I decided I needed to change. And I started a program actually at my studio it was called Fit and Lean, of all things, more from a marketing perspective. And the marketing was amazing, did really well that way. But it was really like a gentle habit mindset approach coaching program for 12 weeks. And at the same time, I started my podcast. And I just want to spread the message of what real health and wellness looks like, outside of just like these sort of habits and strategies and tactics and the how-to, the meal plans and all that kind of stuff, because we love that kind of stuff. Like, I love it too. Like, I do. And it's important too, because you can be having the best mindset in the world and you can be doing the wrong thing for your body and still not get results or still not be able to stick with it. So I really wanted to combine both. And that's what I do. And when I say it's a journey, as you know, Danielle, like, it is a journey, and there is no arriving of this place where like, oh, I figured it all out. We have these, through, whether it's through your relationship with food or your health or your relationship with your spouse, your kids, or your whatever, or business, like, there's no figuring it all out. There's just this commitment to keep going. That's all it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, I love everything you just shared. It's similar conversations that we've had on the podcast. And, we have a lot in common in the way that we both look at, that underneath piece, like what's going on the inside,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so many clients, it's fascinating you coming at it from like the fitness side, because I also have a lot of clients who would, have still in this old belief pattern of all I need to do is work out harder, right? Less calories in, more calories out. Like just, I'm not working out hard enough, and right, trying to out exercise a bad diet, or even using exercise for guilt, right? Or like I binged last night, so now I have to punish myself by going and exercising, right? And that whole thing. So yeah, really fascinating that you obviously had the on the ground experience of working with these clients in person and seeing like, hey, there's something more than just the fitness side. And that's really where I want to go next. And what, we're planning to sort of talk about here, which I'm so excited, is self-sabotage, right? Like you mentioned, you were noticing that, your clients knew what to do, but they weren't doing it. So, maybe let's start off, would love to hear your definition of self-sabotage. Like what is self-sabotage and how does that show up for most people?
Yeah. So apart from like when I talk about on podcasts like this, or because we use that terminology, I don't actually use the word self-sabotage too often, because I look at self-sabotage, you're not intentionally harming yourself. All it is you're not doing what you said you should do, that you were going to do. Like you're not following through on the things you could do, should do, want to do in order to become a better version of yourself. And so I think a lot of us have had the experience. I'm sure all of us have had the experience. We say one thing, we do something else. For whatever reason, we're stressed, we're tired, and we call it self-sabotage. And the problem with self-sabotage is like it's too vague. It's like saying I'm just so inconsistent, or I just can't get my stuff together, or I just can't seem to stick with it. Like, well, what do you want to stick with? What's like, if I was not self-sabotaging, what would I see be different? So that you can actually start to define the problem. Otherwise, we have these very vague, just problems that are really hard to solve. So for example, does self-sabotaging for you look like, well, I follow the plan for, 2 weeks and I get some results. And when I start to get some results, well, that kind of is a bit of a trigger to let myself go. Other, like the surface excuse might be like, well, I've been so good, but there might be something underlying, like underneath that is causing the pattern as well. So it's really good to get very clear on what the pattern is that you like to change, so that you can actually go to work and start to identify when it's happening, start to understand, well, what could the cause be of it? What are the thoughts, the patterns, the stories that might be driving that behavior? Otherwise, it's really, really hard to change anything. So I think that's the biggest thing. It's just really a wonderful word that describes when you want to do something, when you've decided that you're going to do something and then you don't do it. What does that look like? And sometimes it could be in relationships, like we do that too. We can sabotage success in relationships, or we just do things that are not necessarily productive for relationships. And I know I do it a lot. I'm working all of the time on things like that, right? So it's really, and it's going to be different from everybody. Everyone has a different pattern. Everyone has their different thing that they want to overcome. And what I've noticed for a lot of my clients is that it tends to be a very repetitive pattern. So it's not like, oh, I self-sabotage in all these different ways, although it could be the way that there tends to be like, this is what I always do. I'm good in the morning. I'm like terrible at nighttime. I do well until this. And then as frustrating as that is, because it happens all the time, it's actually easier to solve because you only have one or two kind of patterns that we want to just really at least start with, which is a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I love this. I absolutely love what you're sharing. And especially the piece around just understanding that self-sabotage is like this general term that we're using, right? But what is it actually meaning for you? Right. And that's such a powerful approach to really understand that, for each of us, there's a different pattern showing up. And even that word pattern, something we use a lot here on the podcast, is really great to know, because once we identify these patterns of behavior, right, we can start to get curious about the root cause. Like you're saying, what's actually underneath, and why, as you were sharing, I think that last example, one of the things we've talked about in the podcast before is this fear of success, right? There's even actually a fear of change in succeeding in our goals. Like, what does it mean if I'm actually going to be happy and healthy and none of my friends are going to want to hang out with me? Or like, there's lots of layers and stories that we make up about success, just as we do with failure, which is really fascinating for sure as well. And I really, really love just that clarity for everyone listening to understand, like, what is that pattern that's showing up for you, and then getting curious about that. Right. And the way that you described it really just brought up the word integrity to me. Again, that's something we also talk about here, is like how many years myself very much included, have we done that, right? Where we say we're going to do one thing and we don't. I mean, that's being out of integrity, right? Out of integrity with our word, or with, a friend. Like if you say you're going to meet your friend for coffee and then you just don't show up, right? You're not being in integrity with your word. And in that process, what I've seen with my clients is this lifetime of continually breaking trust. And now we don't trust ourselves, right? Which is a whole other conversation for another day.
Well, I speak the same language as you. That's actually that's exactly the same example I always use. I'm like, imagine if your friend just keeps standing you up when you go out for coffee. Because what happens is you would stop hanging out with that person. Right. You stop liking that person. And not only do we not trust ourselves, but we also have, not all of us, but a lot of us have a tendency to also speak really negatively to ourselves. Yeah. And so if you have a friend who never holds up her commitment to you and puts you down all the time, I mean, chances are you're not going to want to hang out with that person anymore. And then we wonder, why don't I like myself? I'm like, well, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it's that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful to think of it as this friend, right? Like being a friend to yourself, and how would you show up? And, totally. Is there some more space for compassion, and instead like bringing some curiosity into, okay, there's these old patterns coming up where every time I get close to my goal, I throw in the towel. Like where's that coming from? Like what's going on there? Instead of going down the guilt and the shame and the like, I'm a horrible person, I'm broken, I'm never going to be worthy, right? That mindset piece, right? That is so toxic. And I know everybody listening is nodding their head. Like this is, by the way, this is like all women, right? This is something we all struggle with. And I'm still working through a lot of that for me too.
Totally. And I think a lot of us do without even knowing it sometimes too, until you start to really become aware. And I love what you said there, Danielle, about the curiosity side of things and how important that is, because you're right. If we have this guilt and shame and we're like putting ourselves down and we think that I'm broken, I'm not worthy, I can't get myself together, you miss out on the learning opportunity. Like you really do shut down. You don't get curious. You just think that you're a failure. And then you go to the same pattern of like, well, then I'm going to like, just let it go and, make the failure epic and just not care anymore. Or I'm going to really dive in and, buckle down and get serious and then do the next diet plan or do the next, cleanse or whatever you're doing, with just like, it's like doing the same thing over and over again, but harder, and hoping it's going to work. It's like, if there's a cement wall and you keep like just running into it, and they're like, well, maybe if I just run a little bit faster, it'll work. No, like you got to do something different. And it's but the clarity part is so important. And I think that, one of the things I teach is consistency is clarity plus follow through. So be clear on what you actually want to be consistent on, and then follow through. And follow through is mindset and environment. But often we are not consistent because we have no clarity. We actually have never even set a goal. We don't even know what it means. So clarity for problem solving, clarity for goal setting is such an important part. Otherwise, it's really hard to assess. But an important part for the self-sabotage pattern is sometimes the problem with like what we call self-sabotage is that the plan is not a good plan for us. And it's as simple as that. I know you do a lot of work with like the body science piece as well. And the more I learn about what's happening with hormones, with gut health, with immune function, with like energy, all this kind of stuff. And for an extreme example, you go on something like the cabbage soup diet and you wonder, oh, I can't, like you call it self-sabotage because you can't stick with it. But the real reason you can't stick with it, it's nothing to do with your limiting beliefs or your past traumas or anything like that. It's the fact that you're not really eating enough, and your body's saying like, hey, like I need food, and it will do whatever it takes to get the food. So it's really, really important. And this is why it's good to have that clarity, because sometimes the only problem is just that the plan is not the right one for you. And this is why I'm such a huge fan of really individualizing a plan for somebody to make sure it matches their lifestyle. Because if your plan doesn't match the reality of your life, you can rely on willpower and like the sort of like, inspiration and the, shiny new object syndrome for a while, but it's not going to be lasting because it just doesn't match the reality of your lifestyle. When I say lifestyle too, it doesn't necessarily mean like just like the fact that we have kids or time, but also means like where you're at from a mental state. Quite often we think that, we all have the same 24 hours a day. It's all about time. And then we try to like block off time in your calendar and block off time for meal prep and all that kind of stuff but my experience is not time. That's the issue. It's bandwidth. It's the mental capacity to make the change, because for a lot of things, like going to the brownies or not going to the brownies after dinner has nothing to do with time. It doesn't take any more time not to go to the brownies. What it takes is bandwidth. And sometimes we just don't have the capacity, or we haven't created that capacity, or the change is too big based on the capacity that we have to create the change. So we want to look at those kind of things. And that's why it's really quite great to have, like, starting with where you're at and doing what's an improvement for you, and being real with yourself. Because yes, like I, as a coach too, I would love if my clients could do everything all at once, because man, would they get results like so fast. It'd be so awesome. But we all know it doesn't work that way. So you got to take it slow and take it one step at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So many good things in that I want to pull out for my audience. Thank you for sharing all of that. I really love that, this last piece around, like, and I see this too, I'm just going to share it in different words, but it's this, like, how many times do we set goals or set a plan for ourselves, like you're saying, that isn't even based off of what we really want? I know so many of my clients will be setting goals off of like what they should be doing, right? What someone on Instagram told them to do, or what their husband wants them to do, or like like their best friend is doing, so they should do it too, right? Well, I should be doing this cleanse, or I should be eating this way because everyone else is doing it. So like, how often are we out of alignment? That's a word that I often use with, like, what do we actually want? And we do tend to live our lives based off of other people's expectations, other people's goals, and have no idea what we really want. Some of the big work that I do with my clients is values, and even understanding that piece of, like, what do you actually value? That's not what other people told you need to value, right? But what is that? And aligning that then with that goal and intention is going to make you so much more likely to hopefully follow through, right? I mean, there's always still going to be patterns that show up, but yeah, I think I see that as well. So just really wanting to pull that out. And then the other thing you mentioned a little bit ago about failure, I just wanted to share this quote that I love, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it's, I know my business mentor obviously uses this often, is this, like, there is no failure. You either succeed or you learn. There's no failure. You're either succeeding at a goal that you set out to, or you learn a lesson. And that is also a success, right? So how we see stumbling through life, and I know my clients deal with this a lot, and trying to get off sugar, right? It's such a roller coaster. It's, I'm doing great, and then I'm not doing great, and then I'm doing great for longer, and now I'm not doing great for shorter period of time, right? It's this up and down, and starting to think and see differently, like failure as a mandatory step in our growth journey, right? And seeing it through, okay, I just messed up. I had a binge night, or I didn't do this thing that I said I was going to follow through on. And then instead of going straight into default, negative Nancy mode in our heads, instead, like, training ourselves. And I know I went through this. It took me a little while. And now it's my default, is when something doesn't go according to plan, I like immediately start asking those questions of, like, what happened? Why didn't that work? Right? Or what tripped me up? Or what could I do better next time to set me up for success? Right? So there's so much we can do with that mindset piece. And yeah, it's powerful.
Yeah. And I think that's a really powerful part of being part of a program too, and having a coach, is because when you're in it and you do have those failures, like those, whatever you want to call them, let's call them failures. It feels like you're doing it wrong. And then when you're like, oh no, like, that's like part of the process. It's okay. And we talked about this when I was on your podcast too, like, that's part of the process for the end of time, and it's okay. Like, but you're right. They get shorter, you get quicker, you have the tools, you get better at using them, you have the awareness, and there are patterns that come up, like even in whether it's your relationship with food or like my relationship with my husband. I have patterns and tendencies, and I've had to, like, let my ego go and call myself out on some of the patterns that was not helpful in our relationship. And it's so sometimes hard to do that, because you want to be right and all that kind of stuff. But you get better and better at them, of recognizing them, calling yourself out, and recognizing that it's not a ding on your self-worth or who you are as a human being. It's because you're a human being. That's why. And life is hard, and being a human is hard. And there's going to be struggles along the way. One of the things I talk with my clients about failure, if they're afraid of failure, when they think about failure as like screw ups and mess ups and stuff, I'm like, don't be afraid of it, because you're going to fail. Like, and when it's almost like, and I agree, like, failure is the same thing, have the same definition as you, like, you just keep going. But when you know that when you expect that's going to happen, it becomes less scary. It's not something to afraid, like, it's going to happen. So don't worry about it. This is what we do next. So it just breaks down that fear, which I think really is really, really quite helpful. It doesn't make it so scary anymore, because it's going to happen. And you also know what happens on the other side, and that it's not a terminal thing. It's just us one step that's required.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so bringing back to self-sabotage, we're using a blanket statement. I know you talk a little bit about like layers of
Yeah.
self-sabotage. So yeah, can you explain that a bit? Like, what are the
Mhm.
layers of these patterns for
Yeah,
us?
I just love like I'm a very visual person, so I always imagine like this like bullseye target when they have like outer layers and inner layers. And I actually think of the outer layers as what we already just talked about is like the plan, the habits, like the strategies, like what you're actually doing. And sometimes the reason why you're not like the problem is that you're self-sabotaging, we'll use that word, is that the plan is not a good plan for you. And like you said, it might be out of alignment with your values. It might be too hard too soon. You might be on this plan that's like, oh, I'm going to eat every 4 hours and only every 4 hours, but you are doing shift work. Or
Mhm.
your adrenals are burnt out and you're expected to do this like high intensity exercise program that's not the right one for you. Or for a lot of women, they're doing fasting. I'm like, fasting is not good for everybody. Or you're on this like low carb plan because a low carbs, like, carbs are bad for us. Carbs are not bad for us. And then you wonder why you can't stick with it. Well, it's because your body's depleted. Like that's why. and you need the food. So that's the first thing. And that's why the clarity part is important and to assess. And this is where also working with somebody else, like a coach, can be really helpful because in our mind, we're like, well, she's doing it. And we think we should be able to do it. Or sometimes, like I said, too, it's just the bandwidth. Like it's just too much for the reality of your life. And while over time you can change the reality of your life to make more room for your goals, there's a lot of people like, yeah, you have 4 kids and you're working full time. And like, and it's not just time, like it's just depletion. So how can we make the goals be more matching for what's happening in your life? And then underneath that is our thoughts. And I know you do a lot of work too. And thoughts is like our mindset and it's the conversations that we have with ourselves, but more the I guess the more like even surface level conversations we have ourselves, the conversations that we know that we're having, because if we slow down and we're aware of them, often we are not aware of them because we sort of just think that we're on autopilot. And that's not true. And when we slow down, we can kind of, there is a conversation happening there, but it's continuing the conversation with yourself and not just accepting the first thoughts or the first thing that you say to yourself, and to go on through there and starting to become aware. And like you said, Tanja, like you're getting curious and questioning and responding to those thoughts, because you can say something like, here's a great one. I think a lot of us have said this: we're tired at the end of the day, or we've had like something, and then the word is I don't care,
Yeah.
and that's a really hard one because because in the moment you don't care, you really don't. So then, and if you just hold on to that thought and that's your last thought, then the actions that follow are going to be things like, well, I'm just going to go to the sugar, I'm just going to eat whatever I want, I'm just going to drink the alcohol, I'm going to just whatever, skip my workout. But if you continue the conversation with yourself, you can ask things like, well, it's like, is that true? Like, do you really not care?
Mhm.
And it's a partial truth because you do care. And I know for my clients, they feel it. They get that too. But I'm like, I know you care because you wouldn't have paid me money if you didn't care. Like
Right.
I know you do. But the partial truth is that in the moment you don't care. The full truth is that you actually do care, but you're tired, you're stressed out, and you're just depleted. And so what else is true? Well, what else is true is like, I'm going to care tomorrow. What else is true is that I'm, I do care. I feel tired. And then you can kind of keep the conversation. So it's just asking yourself questions. It's about just assessing, like, are your thoughts the thoughts you want to keep, or the thoughts that
Mhm.
are going to be helpful, or I like to say, like, are they the thoughts that are going to move you forward in the direction you want to go? And just because like we see this on social media, we have those cute quote cards like, don't believe everything you think, but then you think it, and then it feels so real that we believe it. So it's really a practice of just becoming aware of that and starting the conversation with yourself. And then this is where sometimes I actually like I say sometimes like mindset so much more than affirmations, but affirmations can be helpful. Like just think of affirmations as preloading your brain with the thoughts you want to think. And so that you start to have this operating system of like, these are the thoughts that I'm practicing. And so that in the moment, they just come up a little bit easier. And affirmations don't have to be like, I'm in the best shape of my life, but it could be things like, I'm capable of making one more good choice. Or, today I'm committed to taking care of myself. Or I'm in the process of, learning how to feel my emotions. Or I am safe to feel my emotions. Things like that can be just really helpful. And then, so that's the second layer. First layer is like the surface habits, the plan. Second layer is the conversations that we're having with ourselves. And then underneath that, and this is the hardest layer to get to, but the very necessary, is what we talked about before too, is the traumas. It's the limiting beliefs, it's the patterns, the stories that we don't really think about, but they drive a lot of our behaviors. For example, um, I sometimes have this tendency that when I work, I'm very positive with my team, with my clients. I'm very joyful at my job. But then at the end of the day, when I go talk to my husband, I'll kind of almost be like, oh, work was so hard today, or like it was okay. Like I wouldn't really celebrate the success with him or like how great it was. I would be more likely to share like how the struggles and how hard it was and how chaotic it was and how overwhelmed I am, because I have this belief pattern, or I had this belief pattern, and it still comes up. I'll tell you that what makes me good enough is the effort I put in, or what makes me successful is like how hard I work. And it was almost like this competition to prove to him that I was working really hard, sometimes because that way I can get help and things like that. So it's not like I walk around all day thinking like, oh, what makes me good enough is my, how hard I work, or this perfectionism mentality. Most of the women I work with have a tendency of perfectionism and people pleasing. We don't operate and think about these things all day long, yet they drive a lot of our behaviors. And that's why it's so good to go underneath, like what are the belief patterns that are driving some of these things. And back to your point about that curiosity, that's why it's so important that we are curious and we start to ask those questions. Because if you just judge yourself and you're like, well, I guess I don't, or we say like things like, I guess I don't want it enough, as if wanting the results is all it's going to take. And if we're not doing it, we don't want it enough. That's so not true.
Right.
But we bring this persona of us being broken when that's just really not the truth. Like we're not. And that's why it's so important that we are curious with ourselves and vulnerable, and that we're willing to change our stories, because these stories can be so ingrained, and our ego wants to hold on to them like a life raft. Like just like hold on, because it's uncomfortable and it requires vulnerability and it requires you to be wrong. And that sucks.
That sucks for sure. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so hard. Okay. I'm absolutely loving all this. It's really reminding me of something that I often speak of as, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Dilts pyramid of change, the logical levels of change, I think it's called. I might be messing it up. You can Google it. It's something that I often use in my workshops, and it's very similar. It's understanding that we don't make change from the surface level, right? It's kind of this pyramid understanding, like at the top is all of our behavioral changes, right? And maybe changing our environment. So things like meal planning and all the surface level things. And then as we get layers deeper, exactly like you said, it's thoughts, beliefs, and then even deeper gets into identity, which is where I'm fascinated around. It's around the trauma, like the stories that we're telling ourselves about who we are. I'm broken. I'm lazy. I'm never going to get off of sugar. I'm never going to be healthy. All of that, the beliefs, the deep identities, and really like those deep rooted patterns of who we are that are actually, in my language, stored in our nervous system. That is what creates all the levels above. So people are often stuck in that outer level, like you're talking about the ring of a target, right? That outer level, that's like the mental stuff that we can wrap our head around. Like all these things I can do. I can work out, I can meal plan, like I can get caught up in like all the like almost like superficial top of the iceberg sort of pieces. But all of those pieces actually stem from the core, which is the wounds, the beliefs, the identities.
It's a lot easier though to start with the meal plans, and we all love recipes.
100%. And then we feel like we're doing something. I think there's also that tendency of like feeling like, and I know a lot of my clients relate with, what you just shared, but also this belief that if I'm not doing something or being productive, then I'm worthless, right? I have to be producing, and similar to what you were sharing about what's showing up for you, right? And doing those things like exercising and booking in all these things makes us feel like we're doing something, right? Like we're being active in attempting to make change. And then we turn around and are miserable because nothing's actually changing, and we're relying on willpower and we're exhausted and it doesn't work, right? Because we're not actually getting to like the foundational shift, which is
totally. And that's why I think it's good though. Like sometimes, like I guess people can come at from different levels, and it's okay to start with it and like the surface level stuff, but at the same time, and you do that too, but at the same time, you're doing the inner stuff too. And sometimes the cool thing about this, you start with the surface level stuff, but then when you hit a roadblock, you're like, hey, it's not like now I'm not doing it anymore. Or now, and again, like this is where you have that curiosity, you don't judge yourself and you don't get so hard on yourself. And then you start to dig a little bit deeper. And I think of it like, I know, I was thinking of like like if you're at the beach or in a sandbox and you do a little bit digging, you're like, oh, I found something. And you think that's it. And then you keep digging and there's like so much more underneath there. Like, oh, And it's just, I think like when you have these belief systems or you start to like question them, it's like a light bulb comes like, just like comes on. You're like, oh, and it's so awesome. But it does require a willingness to change. And there are some people, I don't even say this 'cause I think anyone can be willing to change eventually, but sometimes if you fight so hard for your story and you fight so hard, like the thing I should wrote, it's just this morning I recorded another podcast called I Know What to Do, Why Am I Not Doing It? And we get stuck on that. We're like, I know what to do, as if the knowledge was how to meal plan or the knowledge was how to work out or how to set your alarm. Like, I know you know that. We all know that part.
Yeah.
But what you don't know is how to overcome what's happening underneath. And that's like that belief, like, I know what to do, I'm not doing it, is not true. Because we don't know what to do, what we actually need to do, which is the stuff that's underneath.
Yeah. Or even just know that that's what needs to be done. Right. Like, yeah, that's really powerful reframe. I love that.
Yeah. It's just not as like, it's not that it's not fun. Like I actually really like it. I think I love it. Like when I have these things and you just realize like, it's so freeing. Like it's so freeing, but it does require, it does take courage because like I said, we want to be right. And if we've had this belief pattern for so long, we want to keep proving it right because it's comfortable and it's familiar and it feels right for us. And to have a paradigm shift can be really uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, not to bring any of this deeper side conversation going on, but I mean, even just looking at the last 3 years in our world, like look at how we've all dug our heads in the sand with like not wanting to change our thoughts, not wanting to, to switch out of, beliefs. And that is like, I think it's such a self like survival mechanism, right? To kind of create our reality of popping our reality of the world and ourselves is extremely difficult. And it is so powerfully rewarding when we really start to believe and understand we don't really know anything, like in a bigger sort of spiritual sense, right? Like we don't actually know anything. We just know what's right for us in this moment and we can, kind of navigate through that. But being willing to see things differently is such a powerful skill, and understanding that, I know that this is actually one of the things that brought us together is this conversation about learning how to feel our feelings, right? And you shared something and you saw that I shared something and you reached out and that was really,
pretty
really
much in the same week.
Like, yeah, it was in the same week. It was so serendipitous. Right? We're both talking about bearing our hearts and like letting the tears flow. And I think that's a big part of this as well. Like people being afraid, you've already mentioned a few times, right? Like this is difficult, being able to admit that you were wrong or to see your, what I would call your shadow sides or the patterns the toxic patterns that might be showing up in your relationships or with yourself, and being able to actually speak to those. I know, just to echo what you said, is so freeing. I mean, I love that I'm not perfect, and I love there's tons of things that I screw up and do wrong and I'm like not perfect at. And those are my areas of growth. And those are my areas of like curiosity. And they're part of what make me a human being, and being able to like understand that. And I know same with a lot of my listeners and clients struggle with that perfectionism piece, like needing to be this perfect human. And we never will be. And pretending to be and trying to be is just causing more harm, right? And causing us to,
stressful.
one of the reasons it's causing us to probably self-sabotage as well. Like I know a lot of my clients,
for sure.
I didn't do this perfect, so I'm just going to forget it all and just go back to binging or whatever it was.
Yeah, or we get close to success and we're afraid, or then you have a question like, well, can I keep it up? And it's just so much easier to sabotage yourself than to let it happen, from some external force. I mean, for myself too, like I wanted to, I mentioned I started my podcast in 2015. I wanted to start an online business, like really just teaching this and coaching this for years. It took me 5 years until 2020 was when I started it. And the biggest reason why I did it is because the stakes were so high. I wanted it so badly. And that, I mean, I had all these noble excuses. Like I was busy at the studio. I mean, I have a second business, like, family, all this kind of stuff, which is not true. Like, and maybe it was like partially true. I mean, it's not completely wrong. But I know that the real reason I didn't do it is because what if I put my heart and soul into something and it didn't work out?
Yeah.
And then I realized, like, of course it's going to, like, and now, like, and right now, like, there's challenges in my business. But that doesn't mean it does not work out. It's just the part of the story. And I got to keep writing the story because we are authors. We're not the characters. We get to, tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny hearing you share that because I had a similar experience, but the other way around. I started my business and then it took me like 5 years to start my podcast because I was like, I want to
Mm,
start a podcast. Same with hosting retreats, like all those things that I was like, no, one day. And then COVID came along. That was really convenient. I didn't have to do that. Right. But there was
mhm.
absolutely like the fear of failure, the fear of like, what are people going to think? Are they going to want that? Like all my own
Yeah.
stuff
What
coming
if
up.
no one comes? What if like,
Totally.
yeah,
Yeah. What if it sucks? What if I don't actually know what I'm talking about? And,
yeah.
all of that is still very, very alive in me too. And I really appreciate you speaking to that vulnerably and authentically. And like everybody listening, wanting, sharing this so you're not alone, right, in this.
No, you're
Um,
not alone.
Not even
That's why it's so
close.
important
This is
that we
like,
do talk about it though, like either through a podcast or this is like why I love in my programs, I have kind of a hybrid between one-on-one and group calls. And on the group calls, like someone will share something and someone else will be oh, like that's me. But we don't even recognize it in ourselves until someone else says it. And then it's like this like big, like, cause sometimes we're not even aware of those patterns because we just aren't. Like it's so I find it so fascinating.
yeah. Yeah, I do too. I do too. We have that in common for sure. This is so great. Okay, so now I'm imagining everybody listening, really soaking this in, having their mind blown. What are some of the pieces? I know you've kind of spoken to some of these, but I want to be more like specific here around how do we actually break this self-sabotaging cycle? Like how do we actually break these patterns or
Yeah.
change these patterns or navigate ourselves into
I wish there
more
was a
consistent?
3-step process of like just do this, this, and this, and then you're
Yeah.
done. And it's not.
Share the
Right.
formula.
Right. The first step though is the clarity piece. I think this is what we really need to get clear on is like, what would I want to see be different? Like, what's the actual, like when you overcome challenges, like define the problem as if you were to explain it to somebody else. And this is where writing it out is so important because otherwise you're in a mesh of feelings and thoughts and past stories, and it's just really hard. So try to identify the problem in like a sentence or two. And this can take some time. Sometimes I write pages before I get to the root of it, what the actual problem is. And then, like you said too, and I do the same thing, is starting to get curious about it. It's like, what are actually, I should say, before you even overcome it, the first step is to recognize what is going well. I think that's a really important part because if you don't, you show up with this like kind of defeated, like I'm broken mindset, and it's really hard to like step up and to do the work when you feel broken. So celebrate the wins first, and then identify the problem. Like clearly, like what would I like to see be different? If I was a fly on the wall watching me, what would I like to see be different? And then you can start to assess like, what are the things? Is it like, because sometimes it's as simple as environment. Like it's as simple as like, oh, I haven't set myself up for success. And maybe there's like fears and things underneath that of why you didn't set yourself up for success. But sometimes it's just patterns and like just habits of why we do something because we've been doing it so long. And sometimes it's not like it's possible it has nothing to do with what's going on underneath. Sometimes it's just like because I've been doing this pattern for so long, it's just ingrained and I don't even think about it anymore, which is fine. Like, but like don't judge yourself, don't hate on yourself, just see what you can be doing differently and start to pay attention to then like the next layers too, like the conversations that you're having with yourself. And then underneath that, like one of my favorite questions is what am I afraid of? And that's like, well, sometimes it's like it's success, sometimes it's like, judgment. And this could be for everything. Like one thing I've been working for my last couple of years, I'm in my 40s, like is really opening up sexually. And it has like it's been amazing. But I grew up like never talking about sex, never just being so like shy all the time. And I'm like, there's like something else there for me. So, but there's a lot of fears with that, right? There's
Yeah.
fears. So it's like, well, what am I afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of judgment. And my husband like doesn't he loves me and I can like and so if that's the fear like you can start small, you can like have a conversation outside, you can say the thing that scares me the most right now is being judged, but getting clarity on what the thing that you're actually afraid of, because otherwise it just feels like I'm just afraid, like I'm just floating around in fear. And it's generally fear that keeps us from going out, like doing things. It's fears of something. And there's lots of things you can do too. Like just if it's a feeling, like just starting to go back to like when was the first time you think you remember doing this or feeling this in your life. And often it's something that happened as a child, of whether it's the judgment or something like that, and generally has nothing to do with us. It's just us putting ourselves into someone else's world. But we were young and we were vulnerable and we believed in Santa Claus, so we took on lots of things when we were young, and we carry those things on. And you don't have to, in my experience anyway, I don't think like I've had a lot of success with my clients without necessarily going through and like solving all of their past like things. It's just sometimes it's enough just to be aware of it
Mhm.
and just to recognize like just know it was there, it happened, and I can start creating a new pattern. I can start creating a new story, and then just knowing when starting to identify the pattern is that you don't want, and when that thing comes up, just recognize like, oh yeah, like that's that's because of that. Like that's my tendency, and I'm going to do something different this time. And just knowing that like I'm safe to feel, uncomfortable, and not letting your emotions drive the car, because sometimes, like for example, setting boundaries. We feel guilty, and then we don't set boundaries because we feel guilty. I'm like, well, that's normal to feel guilty if you've never set boundaries before, and it's okay. It doesn't mean you're not doing it right. So, or you're not doing it wrong. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. So I think those are a couple of things. And I'm a huge fan of having a practice where you set goals every day and you kind of, and then weekly, monthly, daily reflection, I think is really important too. Like what went well, what didn't go well, what are the lessons I learned today? Like, and I do this daily for myself in my planner. I just reflect and start to look for the things and and really learn by failing a lot.
Absolutely. I would second that, of course, as well. We do learn by failing, right? And we need to understand ourselves better through those experiences, right? If we choose to see it that way, right? There's so many choices that we can make. Okay, this has been so powerful. I know we could talk for a long time.
We can talk forever.
We could talk forever, but I want to be respectful of your time and our audience's time. So, are there any like final things on your heart and soul that you feel like you really want to share? And then, of course, please also share where everybody can come and connect with you and where they can find out more about what you're up to.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we shared so much in the podcast and in this podcast interview already. I think a big part is that like really normalizing a lot of the struggles that we have. And that because when we're in it, it feels sometimes like we're doing something wrong or broken, or we have so much shame that we carry. And the shame sometimes is not even about our past stories, it's about the fact that we can't that we can't seem to stick with something. And we do feel like we're broken. And when you can let go of that, it's so freeing. It's so freeing. And also, I think one of the most important things, especially because a lot of my clients and the women I work with have perfectionist tendency, is that, and we talked about this on your podcast too, that there is no arriving, that there is no place where I never have these patterns come up or tendencies, like, because when you're vulnerable, when you're stressed, when something's happened, they might come up again, and doesn't mean that all the work you did didn't work. It just means that you're human. And so now you have the tools, you know what to do. You're going to like get them out. You're going to keep bring out your journal, and you're going to keep going. And I think that's just for me so freeing. As much as it would be nice, I guess, to arrive at a place where like everything is perfect. When I do struggle, it helps me so much to know that I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, and it's okay. And that way, I can actually work through the challenge without feeling like I'm broken and something's wrong with me. So I think that's huge. And then, yeah, I mean, the best place to find me is on my podcast as well, called the Fit and Vibrant You podcast. And then on my website right now, I have a free quiz on uncovering your weight loss roadblocks. So that's a fun one to take. It's about a 2-minute quiz and then not do I just identify your roadblock, but I actually give you action steps to overcome it, which is important. And yeah, on the podcast, I do a big mix between the body science side of things, like actual things like the hormones and energy and thyroid function and all that, because that's really important as well. Sometimes, like I said, we don't stick with things because we're just really depleted, and we just like and that can really affect your mental capacity. Like it really does. It might have nothing to do with past stories. It's just the fact that your hormones are, out of balance, or you're struggling with gut infections or whatever it is. And then a lot of the mindset piece as well.
Amazing. I'll make sure, obviously, all those links are below in the show notes for everybody to come and check them out, come check out the podcast. And thank you so much, Tanja, for joining us. This was such a fun conversation. I absolutely love this. We'll definitely have to have you back. There's lots of other areas that would be really
I know. So
dive into forever. I know. All right, everyone. Well, hopefully you got a lot out of this as well. And thank you so much for tuning into another episode. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, Be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.